You got it on?
Yep.
The first thing that we do on the tape, Dorothy, is just have you confirm that you've consented to the interview so that we confirm that for the tape.
Okay, I consent to
you
the
consent to
interview.
the interview. And also just that you don't have a power of attorney that has been enacted. There's nobody making decisions on your behalf.
No.
Thank you. Otherwise you'd be ineligible for the interview.
Oh gosh.
Okay. Okay. So can we just check the, we'll stop there and just do a check on the, okay, so could you tell us, just to start out, Dorothy, where you obtained your first nursing education credentials and the year that you graduated?
I graduated in 1950 from St. Michael's in Toronto.
Mm-hmm. And could you describe the positions that you've held during your nursing career? So just...
We don't have time. I've been everything. I've been a ward aide, a clerk, a staff nurse, assistant head nurse, supervisor, director, and a VP.
Okay. And where did you, for example, if we started with the staff nurse, can you tell us a little bit about where you held those positions?
Well, I was a wanderer.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first graduated, I worked at St. Michael's for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to California for a year. And then I came back and I was here for a while, and then I went to Bermuda for a few months, and then I came back. And then I went to New York 3 different times. And the third time I stayed in New York from about 61 to 70.
Mm-hmm.
And but I was very restless. I was always wanting to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking there was something more to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to New York, I went back to school, and that was when I really sort of enjoyed that and
Mm-hmm.
kept going to school.
So is it in New York that you did your master's?
I did my baccalaureate and my master's in New York. I did my baccalaureate at NYU and my master's at Teachers College.
Teachers College, Columbia?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what was that like, studying at Teachers
Well,
College?
I loved it.
Yeah.
The only thing I didn't love was going up there, because I worked at the New York Hospital then, which is at 69th Street in the East River, and you had to go way up the other side to the west side on the subway, which wasn't that wonderful. But it was, I enjoyed going to school, I enjoyed learning. And that was why I went on, because I had enjoyed the first part so much. I thought, well, I'm going to have some more of this while I'm here. And so it was fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a lot of work, because I did work the whole time, or almost all the time.
Mm-hmm.
When I was doing my master's, I finally had to stop, but then I used to do weekend supervision to pay the bills. So.
Mm-hmm.
But I loved New York. I could have stayed, but I didn't.
And of all of the positions that you held in your career, which ones would be the most significant to you?
I suppose being a general was the Toronto General was the most significant.
Can you tell
Although
us?
I think for me, in terms of my own growth in the profession, being in New York, I was a head nurse there, and that was professionally, I think, because of the education and because of the setting, and the work setting was wonderful, and the people were wonderful, and so that, I guess I kind of grew up there, I would say, because I used to be very shy and reserved, and I got over that in New York.
Where were you working in New York?
I worked at New York Hospital, Cornell.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I worked in the recovery room most of the time. I was on med surg for a bit, but mostly it was in the recovery room, and that's where I was the head nurse. And I just loved it. I had a wonderful supervisor who was very helpful in mentoring and pushing me to do some more than I was doing, so that was a good experience. Then coming back here, it was just one experience after the other.
Okay, so you're saying you came back and was it 71?
About 70 I came back,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually disappointed in nursing here because I felt we were really backward. It was so rigid.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been used to a different atmosphere and used to the doctors working with you and as a team, and come back here and find all the old stuff going on. It was kind of a letdown. And I went to Scarborough Centenary then, and I was there I guess for about a year and a half, but I was used to a teaching hospital. I just didn't enjoy being in that kind of atmosphere, and the doctors there were terrible. So I managed to get myself out of there eventually. But that was when I went to Sunnybrook.
Okay. So,
And that was a real challenge. I enjoyed Sunnybrook. I was there for 5 years and really tried to bring them up to date because it had been a military hospital and they were still very much in the military mode. And so there was a lot of work needed to be done. And the other thing I was proud of when we were there was part of what I was doing, but that was when they built K-Wing, which was the new veterans wing. And the other was so appalling that it was just wonderful to have a beautiful place. It was beautiful then and well appointed, and a place for the veterans could be in a home rather than in an institution.
So, what was the position you held at Sunnybrook during
I was
that time?
I went as the director of nursing, and then they appointed me as assistant executive director. Well, that just about finished the doctors off. It was a great parade to try and stop that, but they didn't. So, but that was equivalent to being BP nursing, really.
Yeah.
And then I think I sort of burnt myself out there, so I decided to leave. Then I went to the RNAO, and then that was too dull.
How long were you there?
About a year and a half. I'm not a staff person, like I needed to be in charge. So I went, that was when I went to the general.
Okay.
And I was there for 9 years, and that was definitely a challenge.
Would you describe that as probably a high point in your career, the time that you were at the general?
I guess it was, because it was a prestigious place, and a lot of history there, in nursing in particular, and in medicine. So it was a challenge, and I felt there was lots to do. And when you sort of, one of your other questions is about one of your high points. I think it was a high point and it was a low point, because during the 9 years we did a lot, and it's sorry. And I had a good team, and it really was working well. And so I was very proud of that. But then what happened was the merger with the Western, and that was I just thought, well, that was dumb. And it ruined everything we'd done. So that was the low point, because I knew that it was all going to be downhill from then on, and that was why I left.
Now, I recall that you had, did you initiate the clinical nurse specialist role?
At Sunnybrook, I did.
At Sunnybrook?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it would be, they certainly needed something for nursing. Sorry, my sinuses are acting up. And the first person I hired was Pam Dawson as a nurse clinician. I couldn't get anybody with a master's degree because they were mostly going into teaching. Although eventually I did, there was somebody in cardiology who had a master's, and she took over the role. So I started that there, and when I left, I think there were about 5 or 6 of them. And because I thought there needed to be some progression for clinical nurses rather than going to administration, because that isn't what everybody's cup of tea was. And if you wanted to remain in the practice field, you had to do that. And I had been working with the clinical nurse specialist in the States.
Right.
So I sort of knew the role from that.
And then when you went to the Toronto General, did you introduce them at Toronto General as well, or were they there when you got there?
No, they weren't there when I got there. I made quite a few changes there. It was very hierarchical.
Yeah.
And it took me a time to do it because the president was not in the least bit. He was very authoritarian, and he didn't go for decentralization. So I was very sneaky about it, I guess you could call it. And it took me a while, but eventually I did get it broken down into the 4 areas, and I had 4 directors working with me, and that's when I had really good people. I had Louise Lemieux Charles and Susan Smith and Gail Peach and Leslie Bradley, who was somebody who'd come from Sunnybrook, and she was a wonderful person. And it really was just ticking along, starting to do nicely. We were getting along well with the doctors. We sort of negotiated, you'll get this and we'll get this. And so we managed to really be successful. And they even admitted it one day at a medical advisory committee. We had done a presentation and they were so impressed with it. So that was kind of nice.
Were you a voting member of the medical advisory committee there?
While I was there, Paul Garfinkel was the head of the medical advisory committee, and I used to sit in on the meetings, and he said, "This is ridiculous." And he was very good to me. He got me in as voting member, and everything that would come up, he'd say, "What's your opinion?" So you really were invited to participate, but that took a while. And
well, that was unusual at the time, actually.
yeah, it was, and I think that happened after Vic Stoughton came as president, because he opened things up considerably. He was totally different than Jim, and things were much more laid back, and so he was quite agreeable to that. He wasn't, coming from the same era, actually, because he was a much younger man too. And he wanted to see things happen. So he made that very clear when he came. He took the head of the medical staff and myself out and told us that if we weren't prepared to change and make things different, that we could leave. So there wasn't any doubt about what you were supposed to do.
Who was the chief of medicine when you were there?
Oh God, I forget his name now. He was fairly new. There had been somebody there for a long time, and then this other fellow came, and he was new, and his background was psychiatry, which is very different for that kind of position. It just doesn't come to me at the moment.
Okay. And so if you were, I'm just thinking about your career in terms of linking it with some of the major issues of the time, because actually you were in that role at a very interesting time for
at the same time, I was at the College of Nurses. I was on the council for 2 terms, and I was president for one. And that was in the early 80s. Yeah. So there were that was when we started to develop the standards of practice.
Right.
And I worked on that committee for years, even after I was off the council. I was on that committee for standards of practice. At the same time, I also was on the committee at Ryerson for them to become a degree program, and that took several years as well.
Right.
So I was involved in those kinds of things, because it was anything that I felt could upgrade nursing and make us more visible and better educated, I thought was important. Because I think one of the things I realized when I was in New York was how poor my original education was, because I had to write exams there. And if I hadn't been going to school, I don't think I could have written those exams with what I came with originally. And so I've always promoted education, much to people's distress at times.
On that vein, what were some of the things that Toronto General was doing around continuing education for staff nurses?
Well, I did manage to get my hands on some money that, that had been sort of in the foundation, but it was earmarked for nursing, which you never really used.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to use that money a lot for things for to help people going on to school. The other thing is we did a lot of workshops in house. I did workshops myself with the staff nurses. And then I used to take the head nurse group and the rest of them out a couple of times a year, and we'd have a 1 or 2 day session with partly with me and partly with other people coming in, and trying to keep them up to date with what was going on and where I wanted to go with all of this, and also to help them. We had Diane Abbey Livingston, I don't know if you know her, she used to do a lot of work on teamwork and that sort of stuff. So we had spent a lot of time on that. And also developing the nurse managers, because they had been they couldn't make a decision about anything originally. And I didn't like that, so we spent a lot of time developing them. But I did staff workshops with staff nurses. I used to do that a couple of times a year because it helped for them to meet me and see that I was a person after all, and to hear their stories, which was really, really interesting, because lots of them were very talented. And that was what I wanted to do, was bring that out and get them to go on with their career. So that was fun. I used to love that, because I started a lot of that after I took that course in Washington. I did my second master's in Washington, and that was in the 80s, the early 80s as well. When I finished at the college, I started taking that program, and that took 2 years.
Tell us a little bit about that program.
Well, that was fascinating. It was in conjunction with the National Training Laboratories in Washington and American University. And they had excellent instructors. And it was a group of 28 of us, and we went to Washington once a month for a 3-day weekend. And that was half a course was a 3-day weekend. And it started with a week in the beginning, and then in the summer we had a week of team leading and team work, and true confessions and all that sort of stuff. And then there was a week at the end, and we did a practicum, and I did it at one of the hospitals in Washington with a team. There was a team with us. And it was wonderful. I was the only nurse in it, which was nice. And they were all younger than me, except for a couple of guys who were about my age. But see, I was in my 50s by then. And everybody else was in their late 20s, and they were very competitive. It was hysterical at times, because I knew if I did it, I couldn't get wholeheartedly in it, because I had so much work. At the general, I didn't really need anything else. But I had wanted to do that program for years and years and years.
And what was the program?
It was basically human resource development, organization development.
Right. Yeah.
And I'd had my eye on it for a long, long time, and I thought, as soon as I finished at the college, I thought, I'm going to do this. And so a lot of that stuff I would bring back and try to implement things at the hospital, and use what I was learning. So that was fun.
So can you tell us a little bit about how that particular program changed your approach to leadership and management?
Oh, it made me more laid back, I guess you could say. And also, I think helped develop a spirit of working in teams, because everything we did was in teams. You did your paper on your own, but everything, when we were there during the 3 days, we were in teams all the time. And you really had to work at getting along in those teams. So I think it developed me a lot from that perspective. And what was fun about it was that it wasn't nursing, it was other stuff, and yet you see the similarities. So it was helpful from that perspective. And they were a very colorful group of people. It was quite quite interesting. And I was so impressed with the people who were doing the instructing there. Two of them especially were psychologists from Washington, and we used to go to Bethel, Maine for the seminars at summertime. And they had a big house there, and they used to entertain everybody. He had this big veranda with about 14 rocking chairs on it. And then we'd all go in and sit and have a little powwow there. And he was really funny, but excellent. Charlie Seashore, he was just something else. And his wife Edith, she was just the same. They're very outspoken couple, so you never know what was coming out of them. Mm-hmm. But when I was at Sunnybrook, I had gone down there a couple of times for a week's course, because I kind of got hooked on it, and I found that it was personally was helpful to me to loosen up, and taught me to think always, like I think in nursing you're so rigid, you think about one thing all the time. It taught me to think that there would always, Charlie used to always say, there's a flip side to everything. Right. So flip it over and see what it looks like from over there, and then you find out you think about it totally different. Right. You know, it was, I enjoyed it. It was wonderful.
Now, in terms of the Toronto General, is there anything particular that stands out from your experience there that you're particularly proud of, or feel it was a particular success?
No, I was proud of the team that we had, and the fact that we were able to do some things, and because those doctors there are something else, and they, you know, they were so used to having their own way about everything. But when Vic came, he changed the atmosphere a lot, because he was easygoing and very competitive as well, but he was wanting to do things and to see things done differently, and it sort of got some of them hooked away from their traditional ways, which was good. And I'd spent 9 years, or almost 9 years doing that. I know after I'd been there for 8 years, one night all my managers had a surprise dinner party for me, which was totally a big surprise. I didn't know anything about it, because they were all so happy with working there, which was very nice.
Oh, very nice.
And yet it was interesting when I left there. I was with Addie Jack, and when I left, I said, they don't realize that, but that may be my farewell party. Oh. Because I just felt I was at the point of
time to move on.
What do you do next? And that was one of the questions in terms of taking that program. One of the things I had in my mind is, what do I do next? Because I don't want to keep doing this over and over again. Right. Yeah. And then I did end up leaving the next year. But they had a wonderful party for me then at the York Club. It was something else. We closed the York Club. I think they thought we'd never get out of there.
So is that when you went, you started to do some teaching at the university?
Yeah, well, that was when I started doing consulting.
Okay.
And I guess it was probably about a year after that I went to Manitoba to teach the nursing admin program, because person who was supposed to do it left in August, and it was starting in September, and they hadn't had a course there before in that, so they were a bit up the tree there. So she phoned me, and I can't remember the name of that person at the moment, who was the dean at Manitoba then. Anyway, she called me and said, could I possibly do it? Come for a weekend, a day or so, or 2 days a week or something. So what I did was go 3 days a month and taught all day, and I had an open session the next morning. And the classes were small. There was only 8 to 10 people, but it was kind of fun. So it got me, I used the stuff that I had learned in my organization development course, a lot of that. And I did that for 2 winters.
Winters.
It was hell. I mean, I hate the winter to begin with. In Winnipeg, it's just, it's like the end of the world out there. You're just snowbanks up to here. Anyway, and that's sort of when I got into the teaching, because I had never saw myself as a teacher. But there I was.
And so was it after that that you?
And it was after that, and then I came back and I thought we should start something here. And Peggy Leet and I met with, I forget who was dean at the time, to try to start something at U of T, but they wouldn't have any part of it.
Was that Phyllis Jones?
Phil?
It was Phil, I think, yeah. And I remember we were very disappointed that day, the two of us, after we'd been, because we thought we could jointly do something, you know, because she was doing the Health Admin program.
Right.
Anyway, it was not till Dot went, and then Dot phoned and said she wanted to start it, and would I come in and teach. So that was when I started the teaching there. And I did that, had part-time, and I had my consulting business the rest of the time. So, and that was fun. I enjoyed doing that. It was different.
So the consulting, were there very many nurses doing consulting when you were doing
Not so many, no. I don't know how I had the nerve to even start thinking about it. But it was interesting. The first thing I did, Wanda Plachta, who was at the General, she was one of the other vice presidents, in charge of the lab and all that sort of stuff, X-ray and everything. They wanted to do a study at the technical school. What was it?
The Michener?
Michener, yeah. They wanted to look into having nurses assist in the OR, and because they were thinking about starting a course, and so they asked me to do do a little project on that, and so I did. I trotted around the province and did these godforsaken places to talk to them about that. So that was my first piece of work, and then the second one was at the Clark, and they were in trouble as always, and so I did some work there, and then things kind of got going from then on. And then I also did a bit of work with Price Waterhouse. They would call me in if they needed extra people sometimes. That was fun. I enjoyed that. Yeah. It's not, and it was very disappointing to see the whole thing go downhill. I mean, it was just a mess for the next I would say the next 3 or 4 years were a mess. They got somebody up from the States, and that didn't work, and it was just really bad news.
Is there anything else that you would like to share?
No, when I think about it, I wonder why I did it. I must have been out of my mind or something.
One of the things that you didn't touch on is the Dorothy Wylie leadership